my privilege to welcome you at the parallel session of 26th International Chief Justice Conference organized by City Montessori School, Lucknow, under the distinguished moderation of Honorable Dr. Joshua Lincoln, eminent diplomat and global governance scholar. He is a distinguished international diplomat and senior fellow at Tufts University Center for International Law and Governance. He served as Secretary General of the Baha'i International Community from 2013 to 2019, leading global governmental and civil society engagement. The session brings together two profoundly consequential themes that shape humanity's collective destiny. Our first discourse, the problem of global warming and climate change, environmental justice and the need of International Environmental Court, will be illuminated by the esteemed Honorable Mr. Justice Ricardo Lee Rusi. It is my privilege to invite a distinguished global jurist whose clarity of thought and depth of experience continue to illuminate the field of international justice. Honorable Justice Dr. Ricardo Lee Rusi is a judge of Argentina's National Civil Court of Appeals and Director General of AIEJ. Welcome, sir. A leading voice in judicial training, he advances international cooperation and reform in global judicial education. Our second presentation, Present Status and Vision for Outer Space, will be delivered by Group Captain Subhanshu Shukla, an accomplished officer and space expert. I take pride to announce that Group Captain Subhanshu Shukla is our own alumnus of City Montessori School, Aliganj campus, who is an esteemed astronaut of ISRO, embodies courage, scientific brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to expanding India's presence in space research. He made a history in July 2025 as the first ISRO astronaut to visit the International Space Station during Axiom Mission 4. He is only the second Indian to travel to space. Together, these themes exemplify the dual responsibility of our age: to safeguard the planet beneath our feet and to ethically navigate the cosmos above us. So, children, you have a job to do. Students, so we welcome our prestigious eminent dignitaries to come on stage. The protocol officers are requested to bring your guest on the stage, please. So all the students, please settle down. Nobody should be seen walking. And now you have a job to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to our afternoon session. Our two panelists have already been introduced to you, and because time is precious, we want to give them as much of the floor as possible. I think I will not introduce them again. They're well known to you. I can only hope that Justice Rossi is as famous in Argentina as Captain Shooks is famous in India. And I think we have a wonderful panel We're going to combine legal minds and space exploration minds, and we're going to together spend the session thinking about climate change, sustainability, Earth stewardship. That is the theme of this panel. And I think we want to just give time to listen to two very different perspectives coming at the same set of issues. So with that in mind, I think, let me just go back a minute and say I was next to Justice Rossi in a press conference just now, and we had a few words. And the one thing that you learn immediately in talking to Justice Rossi is that he is a lover of the law. 40 years as a jurist, involved in different forms, 14 years or 18 years in the Court of Appeals. 18 years in the Court of Appeals, but also an academic, a distinguished mind on the academic side and the study of the law. And in addition to studying the law and administering the law, he's a believer and has been engaged in programs of interstate cooperation around the study of the law. So these are three different perspectives that he brings to his presentation this afternoon. And I would kindly give you the floor now for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your kind presentation. Thank you to the Thank you to the City Montessori School, to Professor Gita Gandhi. It's my sixth opportunity to be here, but my organization, the organization that I founded, the Judicial Academy, work together with the City Montessori School for the last 15 years. So it's a great privilege for me to be here. It is like my home. And a great privilege to be with a hero and with this distinguished professor, Dr. Joshua Lincoln. It's really my pleasure to be here with you. Well, someone, I don't know who, encouraged me to talk about this topic, the environmental law in Argentina, that has been done over the last 10, 15 years, what the current proposals are, and how all these comments are connected with international treaties that my country has signed. Let us begin by placing environmental law in its context. Environmental law emerged as an autonomous discipline that seeks to respond to global issues: atmosphere, oceans, biodiversity. The word environment is one of the values protected by the international legal order. It refers to a set of interrelated factors that surround and form part of the earth. Thus, the study and protection of the environment find their scientific counterpart within the natural sciences under the term ecology. This word, ecology, comes from the Greek oikos, house, and logos, study, meaning the study of the house, the study of the home. It is used to analyze the structures and functioning of the natural world, which in the field of environmental law can be synthesized as the economy of nature. In this context, the concept of environment encompasses that of ecology. Although the term ecology was formally introduced in 1866 by Ernst Haeckel, a German biologist, naturalist, philosopher, and jurist, who attempted a general interpretation of Darwin's theory. The idea of studying the natural world based on the hypothesis that there are principles governing the interaction between the living and not living world is much older. Darwin's theory of natural selection, based on the assumption that variation in organisms transmitted through heredity are selected by the forces of nature, explains with a certain degree of precision how the economy of nature operates. From there, ecology established the concept of an ecosystem as a functional unit that includes a physical environment and all the organisms living within it. Today, advances in this science allow for the systematic study of nature, providing tools of rigorously assess the efficiency or inefficiency of the production processes in relation to the natural components, processes, and ecosystems. In Argentina, the right to a healthy environment is protected by the Constitution in Article 41 by the General Environmental Law, which establishes minimum standards. This framework means that any rule, public policy, or government action must consider both national legislation and international commitments. These measures have evolved and adapted over time, particularly over the last decade. Allow me to divide these advances and proposals into thematic areas. The first one is the climate change. In 2019, law of the Congress of minimum standards for adaptation and mitigation to climate change was enacted. The law created a national climate change cabinet, established the formulation of a national adaptation and mitigation plan, and seeks to create vulnerable sectors, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improve governance. Environmental education and participation. In 2021, on comprehensive environmental education was passed, recognizing the right to environmental education as a national public policy. This law, enacted in November 2020, is named in honor of Yolanda Ortiz, the first Secretary of National Resources and Human Environment of Argentina and Latin America, appointed by President Juan Perón in the 70s. She was a pioneer in considering the environment as part of an integrated public policy with a humanistic and preventive approach. Why is this law so important? Because it recognizes that environmental protection cannot depend solely on experts or technicians. All public officials, from legislators to decision makers and resource managers, must have a basic and shared understanding of environmental issues. This training ensures that public decisions of any kind are not environmentally regressive, but instead respect the principle of non-aggression, consider climate risk, and promote sustainable development. The fundamental principles addressed by the law include the climate change and the global ecological crisis, causes, consequences, and impact in Argentina, the environmental law and current regulations in the national, provincial, and international levels, preservation of the biodiversity, rational and sustainable use of natural resources, the water, soil, energy, minerals, circular economy and waste management, environmental education as a tool for social transformation, gender perspective and environmental justice, recognizing how environmental impacts affect women, indigenous people, and vulnerable communities, environmental health and prevention of diseases linked to pollution and ecological degradation. The law also provides that the conduct be adapted by each jurisdiction and that monitoring and evaluation mechanism be in place to ensure compliance. At the national level, the Ministry of Environmental has developed materials, courses, training guides, and many provinces have already joined and begun implementing their own programs. The key point is that this represents an institutional cultural shift. No one should hold public office without at least basic environmental training. Just as there is mandatory training on gender, the Yolanda law seeks to mainstream the environmental perspective. In the medium and long term, this training is expected to ensure that all public policies in health, transportation, housing, energy, plus public works integrate environmental criteria as a central, not a secondary dimension. This integration is essential to comply with both national laws and international commitments, such as the Paris Agreement. In conclusion, the Yolanda law represents a fundamental step towards a more conscious, informed, and committed environmental governance. It reminds us that the environment is not just another sector, but the foundation upon which every public decision and development policy rests. Although the legal framework is solid, gaps remain in environmental criminal law, as well as provincial disparities, lack of coordination, and limited funding. For example, Argentina is one of the Latin American countries lagging the most in terms of environmental criminal legislation. Argentina is part of several international instruments that guide global and domestic environmental law. For example, the Convention of Biological Diversity and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. These treaties require Argentina to develop, implement, publish, and update national programs, such as nationally determined contributions, establish inventories, monitor emissions, and protect ecosystems. Moreover, the superlegal status of international treaties within Argentina's legal system means that national laws and public policies must conform to these commitments. This link is not merely formal, but promote more ambitious policies, access international financing, and technical cooperation. Which are the challenges and perspectives? Here, I would like to focus on what remains to be done and how improvement proposals can be articulated. First, the effective implementation of the rules. Good laws are not enough. Monitoring, funding, sanctions, transparency, and citizen participations are essential. Second, federal coordination. Provinces and the cities have powers. It is necessary to harmonize frameworks, promote best practices, and avoid asymmetries. Third, environmental justice. Recognizing that environmental impacts often fall on vulnerable communities, indigenous people, and rural areas, and that the right to healthy environment must be guaranteed equality. Fourth, international ambition. Strengthening national commitments, meeting and leveraging international cooperation on climate change, biodiversity, and circular economy. 5, the institutional capacity and financing. We have to incorporate environmental education, promoting green jobs and foresting a low carbon economy. Finally, the integration of human rights and the environment, viewing a healthy environment as integral to the rights to health, dignified life, and participation. In conclusion, environmental law in Argentina has advanced in normative, institutional, and international articulation terms. The laws mentioned mark a path forward, but the real challenge lies in consistency between law and the practice. Federal coherence, real linkage with international treaties, and active civil society participation. I am convinced that we have a historic opportunity. We live in a country rich in resources, biodiversity, environmental vulnerability, but also with institutional capacity, community, and commitment. If we mobilize these factors, we can move towards a healthier environment, a more sustainable economy, and a more equitable society. Environmental is part of democracy. If we understand this, and if we understand that this is part of education, I understand why we are discussing this in this opportunity. Environmental, law, and education as part of a democracy means the future of our countries. And now I understand why it was included in the agenda. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. I will not provide commentary on the presentation except to say I had the opportunity to be in Argentina for the first time a month ago, and I understand in a different way your remarks that centered on this very interesting challenge and national priority, which is to take environmental law and turn it into practice. I personally had never heard of an example where basically you've arrived at a consensus in Argentina that no one should serve in public office without basic environmental training. I find that an extraordinary thing. I thank God you have come to that conclusion. But I have to tell you, from an international perspective, I'm not aware of that requirement or that consensus existing anywhere else in national life. So I think this might be an Argentinian contribution in that sense. So muchísimas gracias once more, and we will come back in a little bit. With your permission, I'm going to introduce. He asked me to call him Captain Shooks, so I'm doing that. I think it's safer, for me at least, maybe for you as well. Yes, please. All right, I have the microphone. All students are asked to move forward into the VIP rows, please, in an orderly fashion, quickly, elegantly, in a concerted fashion. Very nice. We ask for the indulgence of the people already in the first rows. Okay, the process is almost complete. 20 more seconds. Find your seats. If it's free, sit in it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Please find your seats. We're about to resume. Lovely. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Captain Shooks. As many of you already know, but for those of you who don't, he was as recently as July, I think, up in space. So we welcome him back. We're glad to have you back. And I think I would like to point out a couple interesting things about his background. The first is you cannot become an astronaut in India without being an Air Force captain first, at least. So he's a military man. You have to spend several thousand hours flying Air Force planes in order to qualify to then join a civilian organization called the India Space Research Organization. In addition, he is a CMS graduate. So that is established. And he became the first astronaut from the India Space Research Organization to visit the International Space Station, as you might have seen on some of the short videos that were shown this morning. And he made history, therefore, as only the second Indian ever to travel to space. He's helping to shape, on return, India's futures in science, in technology, exploration, and he's here to share with us some ideas about sustainability, environmentalism, and the next dimension of that project. We heard here about the application of these concepts in the domain of Argentina, as it were, and I think we're about to move into a different domain in that respect. I would ask AV, please, to put up the photo that I asked. Can you put up the photo asked? Yes. I wanted to start with this photo. This photo was taken in 1968. It is the first photo taken of the Earth from space. And it was taken on Apollo 8. And it has a name. The photo is so important, it has a title. It's called Earth Rising. And it is credited as providing the start, in terms of photography, of the environmental movement. Because for the first time, it represents the globe from outside and gives a concept of sustainability, of fragility of the ecosystem that is Earth that had never really been rendered in this medium before. Interestingly, it also is the beginning of a small trend of people who have gone to space coming back and then beginning to speak out and to take an added interest in issues of sustainability. There were several out of Apollo 8 who started doing that in 1968, as early as 1970. In the US, it was at that time. But ever since then, there is a distinguished group of astronauts who, on return to Earth, have taken up this issue in one form or another. And I thought that's a very interesting experience, a very interesting fact to record. And we would have with us Captain Shooks, who in some respect is the most recent member of this group. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Joshua. Before I start, I think all of you understand very well of how much energy it takes to go to space. So I would like to see some of that energy here in this hall. So can we have a show of energy of how awake and excited you are to go to space with me? I would have made all of you stand up and sit down a few times so that you wake up or if you were sleeping, but Geeta ma'am did it for me. So really happy. Can we have the presentation, please? So we just heard about why it is important for us, all of us, to understand the environment around us, and there is a need to protect it. It is extremely important for us to understand the gravity, no pun intended. But the important aspect is that if we understand it at this stage, when you are sitting in the classrooms, I think when you go out, you would really have the necessary information to make measured decisions, because this is going to affect all of us. So from there, what I will do is I will shift to space. I will take you to space with me. I don't have a lot of time. I have a few minutes, and I will try to share my journey with you and also share some of the thoughts that I have, having completed my mission, and how all of it fits together. It doesn't seem a long ago when I was sitting in one of the chairs, like you are sitting today. I was on the other side. I was sitting and listening to these conferences. And it doesn't seem so, but it has been a long time. Like it was 2002 when I passed out from CMS. So it has been 23 years that I'm out. But somewhere deep inside, I carry the lessons that I took here, sitting in these classrooms and these halls. So let us go on this journey together and let us see what we can learn from space today. Can we move on to the next slide, please? What I will do is I will start by talking about why do we explore, why do we go to space, what is the need for it. There have been a lot of questions that I've received. There are problems to be solved on Earth. We have basic problems. Why do we do this? So let us try to address that if we can. I will share some historical perspective, since the theme of this entire conference, not just this one, is on global governance and how we all are citizens of one humanity, one society. So I would like to touch upon the historical perspective and now talk about what is happening today globally in terms of space exploration and how it has changed over the years. Thereafter, I will move on to my mission, and I will just highlight one aspect each from, let's say, launch, on orbit, and recovery, and show you some cool videos. You will enjoy this, I promise. But I will also derive something that we can learn from each of these things. What I want to convey to you, it is not simple to launch a human to space. And it takes a huge team, a very big team to make that happen. And that team is distributed globally, actually. It is not locally. Everybody across the globe works together to make a mission happen. So I would talk about that, and then we'll quickly touch upon what is there in the future for us. What is there in the future for you? Where are you going to go, and what are you going to do for us? Can we move on to the next, please? So why do we go? Why do we go beyond the Earth? One thing is, I think inherently we humans are very curious beings. We like to solve things we don't understand. And if we don't have problems, I think we create problems for ourselves, and then we want to solve it in a way. So going to space creates a lot of new problems, because this is an environment where life should not exist. There is no air, there is no water, there is no protection from radiation. But we have been living in space for a long time, successfully so. And when we pursue these complex things, we end up solving problems on Earth, which we didn't even think of when we started on this journey. Very, very basic examples I have. The duct tape that we use every day is a gift of space exploration. The Velcro that you use on your clothes without even thinking, again, space exploration. The cordless, battery-operated power tools, again, thanks to space. So we don't understand what happens or what is going to happen when we pursue such big problems. But you end up solving a lot of issues on Earth in the pursuit of something which is so complex and so audacious. And the last thing is the perspective that you get when you travel outside the planet. It is put under an umbrella, what Joshua was mentioning, that there is an association. It is known as Association of Space Explorers. A very ingenious way of putting these people who have traveled outside the Earth. But this is the name of the association. But every astronaut who travels to space gets a very different perspective of how we are, who we are, and just our identity in general. And all of that is put together under the umbrella of overview effect. It is known as the overview effect that you have. And everybody feels it differently. For me, there were two big effects which I felt. Okay, before I talk about, can we move on to the next? Let's look at how it looks, your Earth from space. Let's look at that video. One more click, please. So what you're seeing is the solar panels of the International Space Station, and there is this sun. And if we can have a click, the Earth will start rotating. Yeah. So this is actually a 2-hour long video. So we'll just watch this now for coming time. But this is how it looks. It is massive. It is just one. So when you go out, the most important feeling that you get, that this is your home. You don't pinpoint on a place or a region or a particular piece of land saying this is my home. This entire thing becomes your home. And I came up with an analogy to explain it in a very good way. And I think I found it. When we are small kids and we go to schools, our home is our identity. Your parents, your brothers, sisters, everybody is your identity. From your school, when you go to a college, your school becomes your identity. Today, I'm sitting in front of you as an alumni of CMS. You leave your city, you go to some other city for work, your city becomes your identity. You leave your country and go to some other country. You represent your country in a sense. Your country is your identity. And as an extension, when you leave your planet and you go outside, your planet becomes your identity. And it's a very strong feeling. You cannot miss it. You don't look at a place, you don't look at a region, you don't look at a country. This entire globe, the Earth, that becomes your identity. Can we go on to the next, please? And like I said, it is extremely difficult. It is not easy to make these missions happen. For my mission, people all over the globe were working together, whether it is in Japan, Germany, France, US, India, all the people spread over the globe work together to make this mission happen. And actually, I have a great anecdote to say that when we were having our introduction at NASA, first time the crew is introduced to the NASA astronaut corps, and we were talking to them. And this was what I had seen. So when I opened my statement, I said that initially I was really intimidated, coming into NASA. You have heard about NASA from being a child. You were talking what exceptional missions they have been executing. So it was a bit intimidating. But then when I met people all over NASA, it just felt like home. Because actually, there are more Indians working in NASA than for ISRO. That is the state. So that is the power of collaboration, This sector, my personal experience has been that it knows no boundaries. It really doesn't. Whether you are in space or whether you are in ground, in this business, in this domain of space exploration, there are no boundaries. And the second thing I would like to highlight what Joshua was saying about sustainability. I have not put it there, but just because he said, sustainability, I think it is not a feeling that you get. It is a necessity. It is a requirement in the space station. Everything that you send up is so expensive and it is so difficult to send things up that you are forced to be sustainable in every possible way. You understand how important it is. So almost 98% of the water on the International Space Station is reclaimed. That is the kind of cycle we have. And there's a very nice saying that goes around in the ISS that your yesterday's coffee is your tomorrow's coffee. So you can't do anything about it. It is just the same water that is being used all the time. Next one, please. So let's go back into the history and look at this. The capsule that you see on the left is the first capsule in which the first human ever traveled to space. 12th April 1961, Yuri Gagarin went to space in the capsule on the left. That is Vostok 1. And that was an era when there was a space race going on. It was a huge competition between the two major powers of the world, and the entire space exploration was based on a sort of competitive spirit. And the image on the right is the Soyuz that flies today. And today, both the American astronauts and the Russian cosmonauts fly together in Soyuz. It's not a race anymore. It is space exploration that is happening together. Next one, please. Similarly, on the US side, The one on the left is the Mercury capsule that flew from the US side, and the one on the right is the capsule in which I flew in, that is the Crew Dragon. And just to highlight, I just said US and the Russians in the Soyuz capsule. In this capsule, Crew Dragon, the mission that I went on, we had an Indian, we had a Hungarian astronaut, we had a Polish astronaut, and we had a US astronaut. The diversity that we represented, it was fascinating to see how space is bringing everyone together for a common goal, a common purpose, when traveling to space and bringing people back safely. Next one. Okay, let's come to launch. I will just talk about a few aspects, to highlight of how difficult it is. I think I was really prepared before the mission. We have been training since 2020 for traveling to space. It has been a long time. And I was very confident in my ability, to perform the task. But when the ignition happens, when the rocket engines ignite, everything that it just flies out of the window. You forget everything. Exactly. Just like Joshua just mentioning, just like a CMS exam. When the question paper comes in front of you, all your preparation seems to fly out of the window. It is exactly like that. So it was very different because in 8.5 minutes, you're going from 0 kilometers per hour to 28,500 kilometers per hour. I have experience of fighter planes. I have flown them all my life. I thought I knew, but this was just a different magnitude. It was nothing that I had expected. It just took me by surprise, completely. And in 8.5 minutes, you reach space. And when you reach space, it is absolutely silent. In my speech that was being played in the morning, I was so excited because there is so much of chaos, and then suddenly when the second stage shuts off, absolute silence. You start floating in microgravity, and there are no forces. It becomes extremely effortless. Next one, please. So when you get to space, there are two big things that happen. First, it is a lot of fun because you are essentially swimming in air. It is effortless, and it is so fluid. It is very easy to move around. But it is also very disorienting because on Earth, we have a very strong sense of up and down, left and right. But in space, it just vanishes. So if you're busy doing something and for some reason you become upside down, you wouldn't be able to tell unless and until there are, some indications on the machine itself, the capsule itself. So the sense of up and down just goes. I remember my first few days in the International Space Station, if I had to cross the module, a huge module, and there is an American astronaut or NASA astronaut who was working in the center of the module on one of the experiments, I would just sit down and wait because she's in the way, I can't go. And one day I was sitting down and waiting, and she was working on her experiments. The other NASA astronaut, she came up to me and asked me, "What are you doing? Do you need anything?" And I said, "No, I just need to cross, but she's in the way." And she started laughing. And she took my hand and she took me to the ceiling and said, "Walk here." And then I started walking on the ceiling, and then I started walking on the walls. So this understanding of you can really use the three-dimensional space, it takes some time. It doesn't happen on its own. And the second thing is the understanding of microgravity itself. Gravity is present in space. It is not too far from Earth, but we are in a free fall. So everything is falling. So that's the reason you don't experience gravity. So if I was to take this mobile and leave it right next to me, it would stay here. It would not fall down. But your mind doesn't know that. You're going from Earth. So there is such a hesitation to let go of things. So if I have to leave something to work on something, I won't be able to. I would ask someone, one of my crewmates from either Poland or Hungary who were flying with me, "Can you please hold this for me while I work on something?" And interestingly, these are also first-time flyers, so they would hold it. And they would also fly next to me. So all of us are floating, and they are holding this mobile and standing next to me. It takes some time, about 7 to 8 days, to get used to this concept. Can we have the next slide in the video, please? So look at this. This is a demonstration of that same thing. Can we play this, please?
माइक्रोग्रेविटी में बहुत आसान होती है, जैसे कि लेंस चेंज करना. चलिए देखते हैं.
So after about 6 or 7 days, you become really comfortable. Look at this.
आप किसी भी चीज़ को निकाल के ऐसे ही छोड़ सकते हैं.
So after 10 days, After about 10 or 12 days, you become really comfortable with this idea, and you are leaving 10 different things, picking them up and working on your experiments. Everything is fine. The problem happens that you come back to Earth with this notion in your mind. And I remember the first night I was working on my laptop, answering some emails, and instinctively I closed my laptop, took it to the side, and I left it. It fell. So it was immediate course correction and immediate feedback to you that this is not going to work here. But the interesting part is that your mind is a very powerful tool. It makes you believe things that are not actually happening around you. That is the power which is there. And it works in every aspect. So if you decide something once and you believe in it, you will eventually end up making it happen. I extremely believe in this concept, and I think it really works because it is a very powerful tool. Next one, please. The next concept that is very interesting, next slide please, is that of the weightlessness. You don't have any weight in space. It's only mass. So it is very easy to lift things, move big things. The ISS was formed because of this concept, because these are huge structures. The internal payload racks, they were transported separately and then put together by the astronauts. But you have to be really careful of how you handle this when you are in space. Next one, please. Yeah, next one. So here you would see, this is Dr. Peggy Whitson from the United States, the most experienced American astronauts. She actually completed her 695 days in space with our mission. And we used to joke around saying that she actually breaks the record of some of the satellites that are out there in space. That is the duration that she has spent in space. Here she is trying to move a huge bag. And I would let you guess what is inside this. Look at the size of the bag. And she's being very careful to move it around. Can you play this?
Good amount of mass.
Okay. Move this bag, large bag. It's possible to move very large bags in space. You have to be very careful though, because you have to control the mass so you don't move it too fast, because it can get away from you. What is it that we have in this bag anyway? It's incredibly large.
Oh, wow. That whole
So that's around 250 kgs of weight in there, that bag. But it's a good demonstration of what weight versus mass is. Next one, please.
good amount of mass.
Okay.
But there are a lot of changes that your body goes through when you go to space. All the blood from your legs moves to your head. It becomes bigger. Your heart slows down because it doesn't have to work against gravity to pump blood in your head. So it really comes down. So I didn't record my heart rate when I was in space, but when I came back, my resting heart rate increased to 92, 93, somewhere in that range, because it was compensating now. You become taller in space. By 5 to 10 centimeters, you gain height. And I see some kids smiling every time I say this. There are some chuckles from the audience. The problem is when you come back to Earth, back to your original height. So it's not a lasting change. Only thing that you get is back pain twice. There is no feeling of hunger because everything inside your stomach is also floating. So it feels full. So I remember for the first 3 or 4 days, I really had to force feed myself. And then, we don't realize it, but even when you're sitting right now, you're using your muscles. When you get up, when you turn around, when you walk, your muscles are being used because you're opposing gravity. And in space, it is not the case. You're not using them. And so it degrades really fast. In my 20 days of space, I lost 5 kgs of weight, out of which 4.2 was muscle mass. That is the kind of degradation that happens in such a short span of time. Next one, please. And then there are, psychological changes. It is a lot. It's a confined environment. There are warnings going off. You have the understanding of how real the danger is just outside the station. These are long duration missions. So all of that has to be addressed for this. And what works in this environment is the teamwork. I remember I was performing one of the experiments when you put your hands inside a glove box and you have to be fixed in that position for about 3 to 4 hours because you can't move because the experiment is inside the box. And I was doing this. And then after about an hour and a half, one of the NASA astronauts, she brought me some water. So I sipped on it. And then she said, okay, I'll bring a small fan. She brought a small fan and put it next to my head. And I said, no, I don't need it. It is quite cold. She said, it is not for the cold. You are in same position for 4 hours. You are inhaling oxygen and breathing carbon dioxide. And there is no convection in space. So in some time, you will have a pocket full of carbon dioxide all around your head. So you'll be inhaling carbon dioxide and exhaling carbon dioxide. So these are small things. But the insights that you get from different people who have experience, it really makes you understand things in a very different way. So teamwork is really important. When you travel to space or when you do any project or whether you're in a classroom, whichever is the domain, I think teamwork is very essential. Next one, please. So you finish everything and it's now time for you to come back. Actually, I was really comfortable by the time it was the 18th day and I didn't want to come back. I was really enjoying space. It was a great place to be. My wife really did not like that. She said that, yeah, of course you don't want to come back. But then this happened. We went through this entire cycle. So all the energy that you have gained has to be dissipated by the atmosphere. And then it turns into a huge fireball. And the temperatures are somewhere around 4,000 plus degrees Fahrenheit. And it's an extremely dynamic environment. But you come back and land on the water. Or in case of Crew Dragon, the Soyuz lands on land. But all of them have their own challenges. The difference that happens is now when you come back to Earth, you are yourself. This is a new environment for you. Although you have grown up here, you have evolved for this environment, but you have been in space. You have not. Now your body has rewired for a different environment. So when you come back, this feels new. Next one, please. So I remember we had an exercise that if the capsule lands on water and there is a leak, there is some damage to the capsule and the water starts coming inside, then the crew is required to quickly egress the capsule, throw the life raft out, put on the vest, safety vest, and jump in the water and get inside the life vest. And we had to perform this under 3 minutes. So during our training, we found this to be challenging, but we were able to finish it within 2.5 minutes. But when I came back to Earth, I realized that I can't even walk. I can't hold things and get up. It was that challenging. So to do it under 3 minutes in those situations or those circumstances is extremely complex. Can we show the next one, please? This is me 2 hours after the splashdown. When I splashed down, immediately then it was much worse. But this is 2 hours after the splashdown, and this is the baseline test that you have to do to show how your balance apparatus, it gets disturbed because of the change in environment. Can we play this, please? Yeah, it didn't play, but I'm continuously falling to either side. I'm not able to walk straight. So the challenge to do all that under these situations, I think it is extremely difficult. It is not possible. So again, a lot of effort, a lot of teamwork goes into making these things happen. Next one, please. So very quickly what I have done is I have tried to summarize everything that I have done in this mission and brought back. But coming back to the theme that we have, what is the aim? Why do we go there? Why are we going to space? So this time around, when India goes to space, it will be with an aim of having a sustained presence. And this is going to be all unknown for us. But the more important question is, what is the benefit that we get? It's a technical objective, launching someone to space, bringing them back. Yes, technically we have achieved this objective, but what else do we want to achieve? And I think the answer is that when we launch a person, a single person to space, we actually lift 1 million here on Earth. Because the kind of power and potential it has, not just in terms of providing employment. Ever since I have come back from my mission, every interaction that I've had, I have seen the pride in the person's eyes who has come and spoken to me. Wherever they are from, whether these are kids, adults, working in different professions, wherever they are. And I think that is the power these missions hold. While I was on station, I interacted with kids 3 times. And in each of these interactions, at least one kid was there who asked me, not what am I doing, how am I eating, how am I sleeping, but how do I become an astronaut? And I think that is the power of the power of dreams, that you inspire someone to do something that otherwise they would have thought impossible. So I think this is what is really important. And lastly, I would say, being a part of this mission has made me really understand the power of collaboration that is there. There are cultures. We have an Indian culture, there is a US culture, there are countries which have their own culture, but there is also culture of where you work. Like there is a school culture, there is a armed forces culture, there is a civil aviation culture, different organizations also. So what we call the space culture, it really prepares you as a global citizen and think about the problems in a much bigger way. So I think space exploration really has the problem of solving the problems that we face together as humanity. Because when you go out of the earth, the earth becomes your home. It is not a place, a region, or a city inside. With that, I would just move on to my last slide, which is an aspect which I have not shown before. This is the view of India from space. And it's a night pass. And we are very beautifully located because we have oceans on the 3 sides, so it is completely dark, and then we emerge out of this darkness. So what you would see is India emerging in the dark. I will point out some cities like Bangalore. You will see Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, New Delhi in the distance. You'll also see flashes of light that are happening, which are essentially thunderstorms or lightning that is happening on ground. And these are purple flashes. And then we'll cross over the Himalayas, and then you will eventually see an orbital sunrise. And once you see that, my message, I will not speak after that, I will end. But what I would say is, you see this 16 times in one day. And when you see that, you can understand the beauty that our planet holds. And you'll understand how precious it is and why there is a need to protect it. Can we play this, please? So the flashes that you see are the thunderstorms that are happening. And this is India emerging in the night. The brightest city that you see is Bangalore. And on top of that is Hyderabad and Pune. New Delhi in the distance. Look at the lights, the flash, the thunderstorms. And this is the sunrise. So if we have something as beautiful as this, I think there is a need to protect it at all costs. Thank you so much. That was my address to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had an extraordinary panel, and I think the best we can do is bring it to a close and take with us some of the lessons and the impressions and the insights. I want to share with you a couple of thoughts as we go out. Obviously, the second presentation reminded me that we are a species of explorers. It has always been true. I think you mentioned it. We are activated to seek, to go out, to go where we haven't been before. Sometimes that hasn't worked out so well, but in the aggregate, seems to be part of what characterizes to be human. And I was struck that in your presentation as well, the exploration happens within Argentina, but this encounter with the natural world, with how to be ecological as a society, as a government, as a people, is also a matter of exploration. That you are also trying things that you have never tried before. And I thought this was a fascinating thing. There can be exploration within and exploration without. Both are enabled by the law, by the way. you could not travel into space, I think, certainly not on part of the space station and so on, without the 1967 convention. I think this is important. It's a convention. We are a conference about law, our space exploration, all of the cooperation, everything that happens, everything that you just saw, is made possible by international law coming to you. Should be a big ad for it, you know. I think it's easy to be pessimistic about the failures of international law, but here you have an interesting example. You've set the framework, and it enables a kind of cooperation and exploration that we could never have anticipated before. Second thing he said is that you set out to solve a big problem, and you end up solving lots of small problems. Fantastic. I had feeling like you were trying the same thing on your side, to set up a big problem, which is how to give roots to environmental concern and stewardship in Argentina. And in the process, you find you're solving a whole bunch of smaller problems as you go. So I thought these were some of the themes that were shared back here on Earth, and in one of the most advanced cases of rooting environmentalism into law and practice, and out in space where we're still busy exploring and understanding. So I think with that, thank you so much, and we will move on to the next session. Thank you.
As we draw close to the enlightening session, we extend our deep gratitude to Justice Ricardo Di Rusi and Group Captain Subhanshu Shukla for their compelling insights, and Dr. Joshua Lincoln for steering the deliberations with exceptional clarity and wisdom. Today's dialogue reminds us that the pursuit of justice must transcend borders. Thank you for your engagement and thoughtful presence, audience. You have a job to do. So students, you are requested to please move back from the sofa area because our judges are now coming, so you can take the seats which are vacant behind. There are two important announcements. One is, as I announced earlier, that we have found a card key of room number 323, the Piccadilly Hotel. So anybody who's lost the key can please contact Ms. Khyati Lamba. And second is, we have found a mobile phone which is found near the swimming pool area. So any delegate who has lost the mobile phone can please collect it. Thank you. Students, can we settle down quickly, please? The card key number is for room number 323, the Piccadilly Hotel. Dear students, you'll also be able to see the transcription of all the speeches of our eminent dignitaries who are speaking on the screen, with a change in language transcriptions you can see. I now welcome you all to the second plenary panel of 26th International Chief Justice Conference of the World. The topic for today's discussion is Reimagining Global Governance, the UN Charter Reform versus Smart Coalition Alternatives. This panel addresses the fundamental question of institutional reform versus institutional innovations. It explores whether the UN system can be reformed to meet 21st century challenges, or if smart coalitions represent a more viable path forward. The discussion will examine the legal framework needed for issue-based alliances, the role of middle powers in global leadership, and how to maintain legitimacy and effectiveness of the fractured geopolitical landscape. We are honored to have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Yvette Stevens, Sierra Leone's first female engineer turned distinguished diplomat, bring a rare blend of technical and diplomatic expertise. She served as ambassador and permanent representative to the UN and WTO in Geneva, along with holding senior UN roles in OCHA and DISA. The protocol officers are requested to please escort the dignitaries to the stage. The esteemed panelists for today's discussion are: we are honored to have His Excellency Dr. Pakilata Bithul Mosesele, a leading Lesotho statesman, served as Prime Minister from 1998 to 2012 and again from 2015 to 2017. Shaping the nation's political landscape for nearly 2 decades. A reminder to protocol officers to please bring your dignitaries to the stage. We are honored to again invite our second panelist, Honorable Justice Rizine Robot Mazikamanda, Supreme Court, who is a Chief Justice of Malawi, rising through every judicial rank from resident magistrate to Justice of Appeal. Please draw the curtains open. Backstage, please draw the curtains open. Thank you. With immense pride, I want to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Augusto Lopez Claros, an international economist and executive director of Global Governance Forum, is leading the drafting of Second United Nations Charter. Over 30 years in major international institutions, he has served as Director of Global Indicators Group at the World Bank, Chief Economist at the World Economic Forum, and International Monetary Fund Resident Representative in Russia. Our next eminent panelist, Mr. Jonathan Granoff, President of Global Security Institute, who is a lawyer, author, and international advocate dedicated to peace, disarmament, and strengthening the rule of law. I'm again honored to introduce our next panelist, Honorable Mr. Justice Goda Amrasai Balene, has served on Supreme Court of Lithuania since 2019, contributing deep judicial and academic expertise. Audience, you have a job to do. So we welcome all the dignitaries. With the esteemed introduction of our distinguished moderator and our eminent panelists, the global thought leaders now complete, it is time to embark upon this intellectually stimulating discourse. I now invite our moderator, Her Excellency Ambassador Yvette Stevens, to gracefully take over the proceedings and lead us through the consequential plenary session. Dear audience, let us engage with attentive minds and receptive hearts as we delve into today's visionary theme. Madam Ambassador, the stage is all yours. Thank you.
And thank you too for introducing me and the panel. I think we have a number of distinguished people here, and I am as eager to hear from them as you are. So we would start, basically the UN Charter was drawn up in 1945, 80 years ago. Although it contains an article, Article 109, which calls for a review of the Charter, such a review has never taken place in these 80 years. You would agree that the world of 2025 is very different from that of 1945. New issues of international importance have emerged, but these are not covered by the Charter. In order to fill in the gap, so to speak, smart coalitions have been created. This panel is going to look at the UN Charter, is going to discuss the UN Charter and the need for a review of the UN Charter, as well as look at smart coalitions, and then we will try to compare the work of these smart coalitions with the UN itself and see how these could work together. Do they need to be together? Do they need to work together? Does one need to replace the other? We will see from our distinguished panelists. I will first of all call on His Excellency, Dr. Forgive me if I don't get your name right, Pakalita Mosilili, a prominent Lesotho politician. I start with you as as somebody who represents a member state of the UN, and the question I would ask you is, what do you think as a member state is wrong with the UN as it stands now? And how do you think the Charter could be revised to accommodate some of the concerns you have? Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam. In the first place, I am delighted to be part of this panel that you are moderating. One of my colleagues on your right was my moderator 2 days ago on another panel, and I'm very excited to share this panel with him now as a speaker. That is Professor Augusto Lopez Claros. Apart from that, I must say that it so happens that we are looking at an organization, the United Nations, as you've rightly pointed out, that was formed 8 years ago. It so happens that that was the year I was born. So you can see how old the United Nations is if you look at me. Now, I want to believe that there is general consensus that the UN, as presently structured, needs an overhaul, and that it is no longer fit for purpose, so to speak, and therefore the rationale, the motivation for transforming it is definitely beyond doubt. For a number of reasons, the challenges that were faced in 1945 were very different from those that modern day world faces. They hardly spoke about climate change, for instance, in those years, and the myriad of other challenges that we face today. So it is absolutely important that we come up with a world body that addresses present day and future challenges. Professor Augusto Lopez Claros, a year ago, more or less, gave a paper at the University of Columbia entitled "A Second United Nations Charter politically impossible or inevitable? My immediate answer would be it is inevitable that we have a second or a new United Nations Charter. He makes very interesting proposals, but the man is here, he can speak for himself. I will not try to paraphrase him. But I just want to say that clearly the present UN does not, and the panelists in the last panel made that very clear, that for instance with a Security Council in which you have 5 permanent members that have veto power makes most things unworkable. And therefore, it is absolutely important that we come up with a new world body in which, if I may put it that way, we are all equal. The present one, I'll put it again that way. In the present one, some are more equal than others. And indeed, this makes it out of, or incongruous with modern thinking and operations. The challenge, though, is how to go about bring about this new world body within the present United Nations. I want to suggest that it is literally impossible, because any one member of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can veto any proposal, and that kills it immediately. So within the present system, it is, in my humble view, literally impossible. So I suggest, therefore, that we need a new paradigm, so to speak, that will charter a new way to the world finding a world body that is fit for purpose. I would suggest that as those that are hands-on on that exercise go about it, they should consider working more closely with regional organizations, world or continental organizations, like the African Union in the case of Africa, for instance, ASEAN, India with its being the most populous country and with the youngest population at that, it's a factor to reckon with, and indeed other regional or continental organizations. I believe if you work with 5 continental organizations, for instance, it might just make it easier for you for purposes of coordination and striking consensus. I thank you.
So I'll come back to you because I have a question to you on that score. Because many of the problems that we are facing in the world now are universal. And how do you address it within regional organizations, which might not necessarily come together? Why do we need to have, still at the ebb, an international organization? I will turn now to you, Dr. Lopez Claros. And the question I have for you is that you have been working on the drafting of a second UN Charter. Why do you think we need to have a second UN Charter? And what has your work around that been? What have been some of the considerations that you have given to that? I'll give you the floor and then have a follow-up question.
Yvette, it's a pleasure to see you again. Yvette has actually participated in some of the conversations that we have had in the last 2 to 3 years around the drafting of the second UN Charter. I guess the first thought that comes to mind in answering her question is that we live in a world in which there is change and transformation. The institutions that came out of the San Francisco Conference in 1945, the UN Charter, the UN United Nations principally, but also the other supporting institutions that have created a context for international cooperation, the World Health Organization, the IMF and the World Bank, which came into being the year before, and so on. These organizations are essentially struggling to live in a world in which, because of science and because of technology, there is profound changes taking place. Right? And I think what has emerged is something that some experts in the field call a governance gap, an increasing inability of the institutions that we have today to deal with the degree of complexity and the problems that we face. What problems? Well, you are all familiar. We have accelerating climate change, which has turned into an existential threat to our future. We have a renewed arms race. We have issues of vulnerabilities in the global financial system, which I think, this is the economist speaking now, will lead to a global financial crisis in due course. The scientists are already saying that the likelihood of another pandemic in years to come is high, and so on. And so we are living in a world in which we have these risks confronting us, casting a shadow of the future of the human family, and the institutions that we have to bring nations together to collaborate to find solutions to these problems are not adequate to the task. And I think, Yvette, that was the primary motivation of this project. We convened a group of experts a couple of years ago. We published a paper in 2003 making the case that in light of these risks, the time had come for us to rethink the Charter and to bring the Charter into the 21st century. And then, as you know, last year we published what we thought could be a revision of the UN Charter, something that we call a second UN Charter, because we think in the future, as the world continues to evolve and change, there will be a need for a third and a fourth and so on. That this instrument, the 1945 chapter, which has remained frozen in time for 80 years, is no longer adequate to the task that we face. So that is, I think, the idea behind this project. Now, obviously, the interesting question is, having made the case that we need to bring this document into modernity, and so that it will empower our principal instrument, international cooperation, the United Nations, to allow us to resolve and find solutions to these problems, what are some of these proposals? What are some of the reforms that you're putting on the table? And I'd like to spend a little bit of time saying a thing or two about that. Right? And obviously, it's a big agenda. The second United Nations Charter has 100 pages because it's an annotated document, which means that we're providing commentary and justification for the changes that we're proposing, right? But I'll give you 3 examples. The United Nations, as it was conceived in 1945, is essentially an organization of states. Although it says we the peoples, in fact, and this was actually noted by Albert Einstein in an open letter that he wrote in 1947 to the General Assembly, he said, you, the members of the General Assembly, you are diplomats. you represent the party in power back in the capital. And he thought that they should actually be elected democratically in their nations of origin. So in the second charter, we are expanding the concept of the UN from an organization of states into an organization of states and peoples. And we're doing this by proposing the eventual creation of a parliamentary assembly, a kind of a second chamber within the UN system that would be made up of either members of the national parliament who come and join this parliamentary assembly, or more likely, I know that would be the case in Lithuania because Lithuania is a member of the European Union, and the European Union already has a European parliament, and they are elected by popular vote. I come from Spain, we do the same, right? Either way, either the parliamentarians themselves or directly elected, this body would operate under principles that are different than those that apply to the General Assembly. In the General Assembly, I live in Spain, the representative of the Spanish, of Spain is the voice of the Spanish government. In fact, it's the voice of the party who happens to be ruling in Spain at that particular moment. But the members of the Parliamentary Assembly would not answer to their governments. They would be answering to the people. Right? And we think that this would create a kind of a greater legitimacy within the UN system. So that's one idea. As you know, I was speaking to students yesterday. It's one of the great attractions of coming to Lucknow, and I thank Gita for providing that opportunity because it is really stimulating and enjoyable and uplifting in so many ways. But I was telling the students that the 1945 charter doesn't mention the word climate. You know that. It's not because we weren't aware that there was something called the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect was discovered in the late 19th century by a Swedish chemist, Svante Arrhenius, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1907. We knew that there was already a process of global warming, but in 1945 the focus was peace and security. Correctly so, understandably so. So in the second charter, we are creating an entirely new chapter called the Earth System Council. Why? Well, because we think it is absolutely important that we have a body that brings a degree of coherence into the very fragmented environmental legislation that we have in the world today and other problems that we have in the area of environmental law, which are partly responsible for our inability to deal with the problem of climate change. And then one third example, although I could give you more, and I am aware of time limitations, and I want to be respectful of my fellow panelists. You know, when I go to New York, I have been there twice in the last few months, in November, in September, during the General Assembly. I meet with UN missions. In November, I met with 12 UN missions. And whenever we talk about reforming the United Nations, at the top of the list is the issue of Security Council reform. There are two problems with the Security Council. One is the issue of representation. Did you know that there are 62 countries which have never served in the Security Council in the entire history of the UN? I don't know whether Lithuania has served. Okay, you're the lucky one, right? But probably not more than once, right? Okay, once. If it was recently, I assure you, many years will pass before Lithuania has a second chance to serve on the Security Council, right? So there is an issue of representation. It needs to be addressed. You know, it is not a body where everybody has voice, and it is important. If we're going to say that the United Nations is inclusive and that the United Nations is very much about peace and security, then you need to give voice, you know, if not to everybody all the time, at least more frequently. So we address that issue here. I don't have time to explain you the details, but I think that the proposal we have in this charter to address the issue of representation is a very great improvement over the existing system. And then the other issue is the question of the veto, which Prime Minister Montessori mentioned, and which comes, you know, in every single discussion. And one of the things I have noticed over the years is just the increasing degree of irritation that you see among the member states with a system there is a legacy of 80 years ago. The Security Council reflects the political realities of 1945. And what are the political realities of 2025? Well, one of them is that India now is the most populous country in the world, and it is rapidly emerging as the world's #3 economy, right? Something that would have been unthinkable in 1945, but it is a reality today. And India gets to sit on the Security Council once in a long, long while. So most of the time, 1.4 billion people have no voice when it comes to matters of peace and security because India is not there at the table. This is not acceptable, and more countries are basically opposed to that. So that is something that needs to be addressed. And in the second charter, we have a very interesting proposal, to address the issue of the veto. In our proposals, what we are saying is that when a country, one of the permanent members, vetoes a resolution, think the resolution in 2022 asking Russia to get out of Ukraine because it was violating the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter. In our proposal, that resolution immediately goes to the General Assembly, and if by that time the Parliamentary Assembly has also been elected to a joint session of the General Assembly and the Parliamentary Assembly, and if 2/3 of the members say no, they can override the veto, right? So we introduced this very interesting concept. I attended a meeting in September where Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, was making a presentation and arguing the case for renewing the second charter, renewing the UN Charter. And when people ask her, what are some of the ideas that you have for what that new charter could look like, she proceeded to give 5 examples taken from the second charter, including the veto override. She thought that it was a very, very imaginative proposal, and a way, we keep this fiction. We keep this fiction that the permanent members continue to have a veto, but now that veto is subject to a possible override, all right? And so on. Yvette, this is a subject that is a great interest to me and about which I'm very passionate.
Yeah.
But let me conclude by simply urging, as I did yesterday to the students that I had the pleasure of speaking to, study this document, not because we put it together, a group of experts convened by the Global Governance Forum, but because more and more people, more and more ambassadors, people of eminence, academics, people who have been thinking about these issues for a long, long time, are coming around to the idea that, yes, we need to have this conversation. We need to be thinking about what kind of a global governance architecture we need in the 21st century before we are overwhelmed by crisis, before we confront this San Francisco moment that many people talk about, which essentially means, presumably after a third world war, right? So we don't want to wait. Jonathan, correct? No. It is important to have a conversation now. If we don't do it for ourselves, then we have to do it for you, the students, the young boys and young girls sitting in the back of the room, who unfortunately are going to be the people who are going to be burdened by the failures of our generation if we don't get our act together.
Thank you, Augusto. You can see how much passion Augusto has put in this subject, and I am privileged to have been part of the study group working with him. And I want to thank you for the initiative, because as you say, people argue that nothing is going to happen now. Well, let's face it, things take long to happen. If we do not start now, it will never happen. We have to start at some point. So thank you very much. And I like the point you raised too, because every time you hear talk of UN reform, or people just think about the Security Council, yes, it's important for Security Council reform, but there are other things too that make the UN not fit for purpose, and I'm happy you brought them up. There's environment, there's also representation, parliament, and people, we the people. There's also now AI is emerged as a subject which requires attention, and these are not in the charter. And let's face it, even though you say that climate change is an existential threat, actions by states and governments are voluntary. And whether or not we're going to meet the target is a big question. So thank you to say that let's not look at it let's not just look at it as Security Council. There are many other things. And from that, I come to you, Mr. Granov. My question to you is that, yes, it's been established, I think, from the two speakers, that the UN is not successfully implementing its goal in peace and security. First of all, how do you think that goal could be fulfilled more seriously? And the second thing I'd like to ask you, do you believe that the smart coalitions are the answer?
What
smart coalitions.
Well, anything smart is good.
Smart in inverted commas, because I'm quoting what is in. Well, these coalitions that are taking place on different subjects, do you think that these are enough to replace the United Nations?
No. Mm-hmm. So, coalitions. So, the European Union is a coalition. The African Union is a coalition. The treaty making Africa a nuclear weapons-free zone, the Treaty of Pelindaba, that's a coalition. The Treaty of Raratango, making the South Pacific nuclear weapons-free. The Treaty of Astana, making Central Asia nuclear weapons-free. The Treaty of Tlatelolco, making Latin America nuclear weapons-free. How many people know about those treaties? Could you raise your hand? See, there are lots of coalitions that exist that function very well. I think my household is like a coalition. If you knew my wife and kids, you'd understand all the negotiations that go on. There's a neighborhood association where I exist that deals with garbage in the streets and things like that. Then there's the city that I live in has a political body. And the state that I live in has a political body. The nation I live in has a political body to deal with issues that are appropriate for that size. But today, as we know, there's a series of issues that threaten the very security of our physical being and the security of the state. Now, we've sort of become obsessed with the security of the state and forgot about the security of our physical beings. So we first have to change our thinking to be realistic. Human security is the way to look at it. I discovered, and I don't know if any of you discovered this, but the pandemic that hit, the virus didn't have passports. Who knew? The climate doesn't have a passport. Who knew? The issues that we face today, the financial system of the world is completely integrated. So we do need global governance that's realistic. But presently, the global governance system really arises from the 1945 adversity that the world had. Without the knowledge of the world as one family, without the knowledge that we just received from an astronaut, the physical reality, the realism, the current arms race is not realistic. Those of us who say we need global governance, that we need cooperative security, we need human security, we are based on science and realism. One of the realisms is the fact that human beings are moral creatures. We like to do what's the right thing to do, what's the moral thing to do. So I'm going to diverge for a second on this. Whatever reform we do, the normal people of the world have to understand it. One of the problems that we have is most people don't understand what the UN does for them. They don't understand why you can fly into an airport and you don't have different rules like you do for automobiles. Like I can't drive in India because I'd be driving on the right-hand side of the road and I would get killed. But I could fly, but a plane from the United States can easily fly anywhere, just as a plane from India can. Why? Because there's protocols that go through the UN. There is global cooperation and governance in the financial world and in commerce called the UN Convention on Arbitration. During the Cold War, that treaty, that convention, which allows parties to create parties in a financial transaction or a business transaction to determine how they will resolve differences, not depending necessarily on the state court in which the transaction takes place. So a letter of credit in Lucknow is going to be vouchsafed, recognized in Kuala Lumpur or Santiago, Chile, because it will have an arbitration clause. And the parties can pick the manner in which they will arbitrate. So when the Cold War ended and the old system of commerce diminished, and now every single major financial transaction or commercial transaction has an arbitration clause, and that's why the business community continues to have third-party peaceful adjudication of disputes. That's called governance. But what that's about is business obtaining the common good of justice, but paying for it. So the areas of where there's justice needed, environmental justice, human rights justice, anti-corruption justice, we don't have courts for that. So we definitely need security with the environment, we need security for our basic rights, and we need to get the $2 to $4 trillion taken out of productive economies through corruption back into the economies. That's not just needed as a reform, that's really basic common sense. Now, when the UN was created, it was created with the focus on states. But why did we create states? How did the modern state get created? The modern state got created in the 17th century, mainly in Europe, because Protestants were protesting the domination of the story of salvation, of mukti in the Hindu system, the story of salvation through the Catholic Church. And people protested against this. They wanted to reform the system. The Catholic Church also dominated the capital markets, and people wanted freedom of commerce. So they were fighting over the story of Jesus' love, whose definition was better, slaughtering each other in massive numbers. And people like yourselves and ourselves got together in a place called Westphalia and said, we better stop this. And so they separated Protestants from Catholics. They separated people. That was the foundation of the modern state. The problem we have today is, how do we bring people together? But the institution that we're doing that task with was set up to do something different. So indeed, we need to have a rethinking. Now somebody would say, well, that's really, idealistic. Let me point something out. When the modern states were created, 100 years earlier, say in 1540, you couldn't possibly do it. The people in Lyon, France, spoke a different language than the people in Normandy. But in between that period of time, the printing press was created and national languages happened. Like in India, you have lots of local languages, but it's easy to have everybody understand Hindi and have a national identity. So you could have a nation state. If you didn't have a national language, you can't have a state. But today, because of electronic cyber world, we have the technology in which people can have a sense of connectivity with the whole planet. They didn't have that in 1945. Today we do. So we have a psychological capacity for the reform. But there's one thing that we're very much lacking that I think that I'm going to make two tangible suggestions. So I know I'm going a little over, but I have two tangible suggestions. One, I had a diplomatic posting, and I was part of the general debates on creating the statement on the SDGs for the heads of state to sign. And I noticed that all of the debate was the how, and the how was all technical. How you fulfill the sustainable development goals. And at least in my neighborhood, if I talked to my neighbors about SDGs, they had no idea what I was talking about. When I talked to them and said, well, this is about protecting future generations, do you care about your grandchildren and your children? They nodded their heads. And I thought to myself, my goodness, we need to explain the why of all of the discussions we have if the normal persons are going to understand it. So we have a golden rule. I talked about it earlier. We have a sense of global ethics. The golden rule is found in from Mahavir to Socrates to Jesus to Muhammad, Confucius, because it comes from the human conscience. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't harm others as you don't want to be harmed. But when it was stated, you couldn't melt the polar ice cap. You couldn't destroy the world. You couldn't destroy the future. Today we can. I think, and I'd like to have this reported out, I think we need a golden rule for the 21st century. Treat the lives and well-being of future generations as we want to be treated. That's what the SDGs are really about. Intergenerational responsibility. That's a good that normal people will say, yes, I care about that. Then they'll say, how do we do it? Then you could talk about the SDGs. So when you talk about why the UN, without the UN, we'll have terrible wars. Oh, that's why. So it's not about a bureaucracy where people can come and talk to each other. It's about the goal. We have to also, in any plan, have a plan of persuading the public how important it is. And last but not least, something that would help that would be, how many of you students have read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Raise your hand. How many of your friends that go to normal schools have read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Very few. I think that every secondary school child in the world, in order to be a global citizen, should have a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I urge that we report out and request that India and every country that has any political representation here encourage their ministers of education to ensure that every secondary school child has the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That will help create the constituency to succeed in reforming the UN. Thank you.
Yes. I thank you very much for that. Most convincing interaction. I like the point. I think the point you made about dwelling on the how and not why. The why, when you look at the why, then the how, the question of how comes naturally. And I think that's a good point to make. I also think the point you make about what has happened, what has the UN achieved, because all too often the UN is judged by its failures. But when you look deeply into the areas in which the UN has succeeded, you would know that the UN has had successes. It is not an organization that should be written off because it's failing in the peace and security area. So thank you very much for those points, and I think, yes, that should be noted. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think we have to look at every work that is being done related to human rights. If we look at things also related to human rights, it's very important. In the UN itself, the human rights pillar, so we have 3 pillars: human rights, development, peace, and security. But the human rights pillar is like the stepchild. When we said it's the 3rd pillar, I say no, it's one of the 3 pillars of the United Nations. And we tried in the second chapter, we did have a section on the Human Rights Council. So thank you very much. Now, I left the question to the Chief Justices until last, because I wanted you to comment on what you have had so far. And I will start with the lady, Chief Justice. Yeah. And so I would ask you, gosh, I just lost your name. Excuse me. I will just ask you, what do you think are the steps the UN need to take to get states to meet their legal obligations under the Charter and in conformity with all the various conventions, treaties, etc.? We all know that we do have provision. What is lacking is the enforcement, is the implementation of many things are covered by UN conventions, treaties, charters. So what do you think needs to be done to make member states more responsive to to meet their commitments under the UN Charter or beyond. So I start with you, Madam. Sorry, I just lost your name.
Thank you. Well, every lawyer knows that a law without a remedy is just a recommendation. So I believe it was not firstly mentioned during this conference that yes, enforcement is lacking and that is indeed a flaw. What to do with that? Well, as a judge, it's of course not for me to speak about the political solutions, but the way has to be found. And I'm really interested in this second charter which you presented. I actually never saw it. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I promise I will read it. And I think it is very, very important document anyway. Because yes, the law is the law. We like it or we don't like it, it's the law. And we cannot create a law by breaking the law. But if we give up at the very moment and say, okay, we cannot do nothing because it is veto and now we are stuck, and we stop even talking about that, nothing is going to change. So going back to coalitions, which were mentioned, it is another task that they can do. I totally agree with what you said. Regional cooperation is regional cooperation. Universal governance is universal governance. It's not a replacement. It's complementarity. But sometimes, and we have such examples, from this regional cooperation or from small coalitions, the idea supported long enough at the end ends at the universal level because somehow the states or the middle powers or the smart coalitions, they manage to convince step by step. And yes, sometimes those joined by the common interest can be very, very, very convincing. And I know that as coming from a small state, you know, it took 3 Baltic states with the population in total probably smaller than some European capitals to start the singing revolution, and then boom, the Soviet Union collapsed. So sometimes even very small players can be very, very important. So what should we do? I think that small coalitions, it is my perspective, they are more adaptive to address very, very current issues, which we cannot just delay. We must act now. And we cannot wait until superpowers and the UN deliberate in between themselves. Yet, of course, we still have to retain the global governance in one or another way. Also, speaking about those small coalitions, well, judges tend to be suspicious all the time. So speaking not only about the advantages which it can bring, but also to try to tease the possible risks which can also come with those coalitions. So if it is just a regional cooperation, that's okay, that's for the region. But that could not end into having 156 United Nations with different names and with different standards, legal standards, economical standards. So when those small coalitions act like supporters of an idea going to the international level, they have to be somehow connected with the general principles, which are, again, in the Charter, the first and the second, I believe. So I think those two models, they just complement each other. So it's not really versus, it's how.
The same question, sorry. I give you the floor to a second Chief Justice.
Thank you,
Yes.
Ambassador, moderator. And since I'm speaking for the first time at this conference, allow me to pay tribute to the founder of CMS, Dr. Gandhi, whose vision in life was so amazing and so inspiring. It has not just inspired the students here or the Indian people, but the entire world, and to bring together chief justices of the world. This is the only time that I've heard that a school can bring together chief justices of the world at a conference. And that's something that is worth noting. And yesterday we had a wonderful reception, a breathtaking reception. And one statement that I picked from that reception was that the rule of life is the rule of love. I think that's what the director of ceremonies said at that time. The rule of law is the rule of love. And that, I think she was referring to love around the world and so on. Same thing about the rule of international law. It's a rule of love as well, because I think states should love each other, around the community of nations should love each other. So I think that was very important. Most of the things that I would have said have been said by the eminent, the distinguished panelists here who have gone into it. But let me say that I agree with the things that have been said about the United Nations, and to agree with you, Ambassador, that there's also a lot of good that the United Nations has done. And so we cannot just write off the United Nations and so on. We cannot just focus on its failures and limitations. And when we see a fractured world, we should say, oh, it's because of the United Nations. We should, maybe there are things, the limitations that the UN Charter, as it exists now, exist, are the ones that we should be talking about. And so, in my view, time for reform of the United Nations structures as well as the Charter is here. Colleagues have spoken about the Security Council. I can also speak about the international, the ICJ, for example. It's supposed to enforce international law, but the enforcement mechanisms are not adequate. So in the reforms that we want to talk about, as we look at the entire United Nations structure, we should also look at the arms, the different arms of the United Nations, and see how we can strengthen them. The advantage that we have now is that we have had many lessons over the 80 years. And those lessons we cannot ignore. And I believe that even the Global Governance Forum has looked at, or continues to look at, those lessons of the 80 years and what it is that we can do to strengthen the United Nations. So yes, reform of the United Nations, reform of the UN Charter, those are long overdue, and this is a time. One element that I think a colleague member of the panel mentioned was the issue of political will and political solutions and so on. Perhaps as we do the reforms, we also look at how much room we give to the issue of political will, so that we can strengthen the enforcement mechanisms, even through the other structures. But otherwise, most of the things are the ones that my dear colleagues have mentioned. If there's anything else I must add, Ambassador, I am ready to add. But thank you so much.
Yes. So, thank you very much. And because I'm going back to the topic, I would like us, I would have wished we could have taken a couple of questions from the young people we have there, maybe one or two questions, because I think the interaction is good. So maybe we could open the floor if we just have one or two questions. I think somebody's hand is up there. If you have a mic, can you please pose question to the panel? Mm-hmm.
So students, you have an opportunity, put up your thoughtful queries.
Good morning, esteemed judges and dignitaries. I have a question which is in my mind since last year. I tried asking last year, but I did not get an answer, unfortunately. The question is, should judicial corporations and organizations have the right to intervene in legislature law-making decisions? That means, for example, if legislature passes a law which does not bind to an international agreement, the judicial body, being an independent body, can tell the government, no, this does not bind to an international agreement, and thus you should not pass this law. This judicial corporation should be in control of the United Nations, and therefore it is ensured that any law passed in any nation is directly or indirectly influenced by some or the other charter of the United Nations.
Yes. The question? Okay. I think if I get it right, is that national legislation versus international commitments. If a country is passing a national legislation which is not in conformity with the international commitments, what do you do about it? At least, I don't know if I represented you. That's the way I understood it.
You know, although there is such a thing as a hierarchy of law, right? I am not a lawyer myself, but I live in Spain, I live in the European Union, and in the European Union you have a very important principle of subsidiarity, right? In other words, you give authority to different levels of government depending on the particular issue at hand. So, on issues of environment, on issues of security, it makes sense to have laws that are applicable to the entire European Union, right? It makes no sense for countries to have national environmental legislation because environment is a problem that crosses borders, right? However, it may be quite legitimate that, for instance, education becomes a responsibility of the local government, and other issues that are much more connected, with the life of the community. I think that the principle of subsidiarity is a very, very important one, and it is something that we have embedded in the second United Nations Charter. I don't know whether that addresses the concern that you were raising in your question.
Yeah, just to add one more point. In terms of what the courts can do in those circumstances, courts will normally wait for something brought to them. So what you are referring to is what we call power of judicial review. And power of judicial review is exercised after the law has been passed and it is brought over to the court to review that law for conformity with as we talked about the reforms, even the International Court of Justice, I think what we should be suggesting is that when the reforms take place, that power should be given to the International Court of Justice so that they can conduct a judicial review of any such law that is inconsistent with. So I think that's a little bit that I wanted to add. Thank you.
In the U.S. system, in our Constitution, there's a section called the Supremacy Clause. And it's very powerful. And it says that any fully ratified treaty is the supreme law of the land, so that it is prohibited to have a state law or a local law that is not in conformity with the duties of the treaty. So when that happens, a party aggrieved by this inconsistency can go to court, as the judge pointed out, and say, this law violates the Supremacy Clause, and it will be stricken. So that's how it's dealt with in the U.S. Constitution.
And such a mechanism work in an international organization?
No, just a second. I think let's give the chance, because there are so many. We don't have much time. Sorry. Yes?
Greetings, honorable guests. I had a query that, based on your expertise, what are some challenges that you anticipate will be faced during the reformation of the global governance structure, such as the reform of the UN Charter? What are some problems that we'll face along the way?
Yes, I'll
ask. The issue that often comes up when we talk about reforming the UN Charter is that if you convene an Article 109 conference, which is the mechanism that the 1945 chapter creates, for reforming the charter. Whatever proposals come out of that conference can be vetoed by the permanent members, right? And so this has led many countries to basically say, what's the point? You know, why bother? Exactly. Why have a conference that is going to deliver maybe something like the second charter if in fact you know, it will be subject to the ultimate approval of the permanent members. Okay, now let me take 1 minute to explain to you a feature of the second charter which provides for a mechanism to circumvent that veto, all right? And I have to appeal to a historical precedent. In 1787, the United States adopted the Articles of Confederation. Right? And it's an interesting story, but what happened over the next 10 years is that there was total paralysis because the Articles of Confederation gave veto power to all 13 states that had come together under the name the United States of America. So in 1787, the so-called founding fathers got together in Pennsylvania and decided we need to do something because, you know, this veto given to all the 13 states has led to paralysis, to dysfunctionality, and we would like to move beyond, right? So what these founding fathers did, instead of trying to amend the Articles of Confederation, they created an entirely new document called the U.S. Constitution. And in that Constitution, they said that for it to become the law of the land, you only needed 9 of the 13 states to approve it, right? And that Constitution was not just a tweaking of the Articles of Confederation, it was an entirely new document. It created a federal system of government, judiciary, Congress, and executive, and so on, right? So it was a marked improvement. And then the Constitution said, it's your choice to join this new organization called exactly the same, the United States of America, right? So in the second charter, we are anticipating that that is something that could be done, right? In other words, if there were to be a review conference, and the review conference comes up with very interesting proposals which gain the support of the majority of the members of the United Nations, but one of the countries says, oh, sorry, we veto that. What we're saying is that we are creating a new organization. It is still called the United Nations. This new organization will adopt the assets, the liabilities, the treaties, the obligations of the old organization, and then a country like whatever, a permanent member will just have to say, well, do I join this new organization or not? It is their choice, right? So I think it's a very creative circumvention of this potential blockage, right? The alternative, if we don't do something like that, is that then the veto remains permanent and it contributes to the current dysfunctionality and ultimately to the irrelevance of the UN system, right? Because then what will happen is that other forums will emerge where decisions will be made, whatever, European Union, NATO, you know, China, and the countries in the East will create their own forums for discussions of global issues, and the UN will wither away, right? And at that point, the veto is worth nothing, right?
Thank you very much. I think we ran out of our time. But I see that many students, a few more students had questions. Maybe I think Justice Commander has made a suggestion that if some students have questions, maybe they could present written questions. I don't know if we are allowed to have one more question, or we could ask them, anybody who has a pressing question could send a written question to whoever in the panel that they want a response from. And we'll see that that is answered. Yeah? So we don't have any more problems. Do we have any more questions? Oh, I thought they had taken them out. But we are getting signs there that we have surpassed our time.
Thank you so much for your valuable time, sir.
Yeah. Thank you to all the dignitaries for an enriching and thought-provoking session. Our heart heart brims with gratitude for our exceptional panelists and for their invaluable insights and exemplary expertise. A very special note of appreciation to our distinguished moderator, Her Excellency Ambassador Evert Stevens, for steering the discourse with such finesse, clarity, and intellectual grace. Dear audience, I trust that today's deliberations have enriched you with valuable knowledge, profound perspectives, and genuine inspiration drawn from our distinguished speakers. As we come to a close, let us take a moment to wholeheartedly appreciate each of them for sharing their wisdom and lived experiences with such generosity. So students, do you agree with me? If yes, let your applause speak louder than your words. President of the Federation of World Peace and Love, POPL, Dr. Hung Tao Tas, has specially presented artworks from the Hung Tao Tas Foundation Special Collections, and I would now request our respected manager, Professor Geeta Gandhi Kingdon ma'am, to come on the stage as they want to present the token of appreciation to ma'am. It's a painting with, it's an ancient painting.
So, ladies and gentlemen, and Honorable Chief Justice, and all the students, and the Honorable Chair, on behalf of FOPAL, Federation of World Peace and Law, and its President, Dr. Hong Daozi, it is our great pleasure to once again be invited to the International Conference of Chief Justice of the World in CMS in Lucknow this year. And we have been here for 15 times. And as a loyal and a good friend of the late Dr. Jagdish Gandhi and Dr. Bharti Gandhi, Dr. Han today would like to take this special opportunity to present a very special gift, which is a painting, a treasure collection of the Hong Daozi Foundation to Dr. Bharti Gandhi. And we would like to invite the professor. Yeah, let's invite Dr. Hong and our honorable chair to be on the stage. Yes, and this year Dr. Hong has specially prepared a gift to be presented to Dr. Bharti Gandhi and the CMS School. It's a Lifu artwork from the Hong Daozi Foundation's special collection. And let me introduce this painting. The title of this painting is Hope Blossoms from Within. Yeah. And you can see at the flower's core, hope unfolds in perfect bloom. So let's welcome Dr. Han and Dr. Geeta Gandhi Kingdom. And at the flower's core, hope unfolds in perfect bloom, drawing us like bees to its radiant hope. Thank you. And next. Accompanying this gift is a certificate of authenticity for this artwork. Okay, and this painting symbolizes the maternal kindness and love that continue to neutral people and students alike, bring hope and warmth to India and to the world, and inspiring the next generation with gentle guidance and positive influence. And next. Yes, next is a leaful scarf, which is love and hope. So from afar, it ignites courage and resilience. Up close, it reveals grace and romance. Crimson blooms embody passionate love. Golden blossom reflect radiant hope. Yes, and that symbolizes the hope and love, and also for all the students and for our next generation. And next is the book, a very special book, a special publication entitled Voice of Conscience, Light and Hope. And this book documents our journey over the years in promoting a culture of peace, guided by love and conscience, and in igniting the power of hope through actions. And now celebrate globally each year the International Day of Conscience on April 5th, and the International Day of Hope on July 12th serve as a powerful reminder for all of us and of the values that unite humanity. So we're very honored and happy today that we can present the special gift to the CMS. And also symbolizes our friendship, long-term friendship, and cooperation, and also the common goal for working for the global peace and the love of the world.
I've accepted this beautiful scarf and the painting on behalf of all the students, staff, and principals and management of City Montessori School, with great gratitude to Honorable Dr. Hang from Taiwan. He runs the organization called Federation of World Peace and Love, FOPOW. And he's a businessman, but he has dedicated his life and his resources to work for bringing, an era of consciousness, because he feels that that is what is going to help to bring well-being and harmony in the world. We're really grateful that Dr. Hang is here, representing civil society, the best of intentions, and the yearning of the human spirit to contribute to the betterment of the world. Thank you, Dr. Hang. Thank you to your whole team.
Thank you, ma'am. Esteemed delegates, as we have gracefully come to the end of today's sessions, may I kindly request all our honored guests to move towards the fountain steps where the arrangements are gracefully in place for a memorable official group photograph, an image that shall indeed be cherished, keepsake of 26th International Chief Justice Conference. Protocol officers are requested to ensure the seamless presence of every distinguished delegate at the fountain steps for the official photograph. Following the photograph, we invite all the delegates to join us for tea. We request everyone to reconvene in the auditorium, as after the tea break, the Kanpur Road campus students have thoughtfully curated a special presentation in your honor, sir. Thank you once again, and may I request all the delegates to move for the official group photograph. You're all requested to be back to reconvene in this auditorium by 5:15 sharp. By 5:15, 1-5. Thank you so much, and Jai Jagat.